Last night, we told you about a call for change that's picking up steam thanks to a very high-profile supporter. Tonight, we're learning more about how business mogul and rapper Jay-Z's Team Rock is putting pressure on the Justice Department. Team Rock has joined forces with the Midwest Innocence Project to call for a pattern or practice investigation into the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. The group say this police force has spent decades getting away with brutality, corruption, and misconduct. So far, the DOJ hasn't announced any plans to begin an investigation. Here to talk more about this joint effort, a familiar face to our viewers, friend to the show, Tricia Rojo Bushnell, the executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project. Tricia, always a pleasure seeing you.
Thanks for having me.
Tricia, before your organization joined collective forces with Team Rock, the Midwest Innocence Project had already been looking into the abuses experienced by the most vulnerable in Kansas City, Kansas for years. What were some of those issues?
Yeah, so all of this really came out to a head and was revealed through the case of our client, Lamont McIntyre, who was exonerated in 2017. So Lamont had been convicted in 1994 of a double homicide he didn't commit, and it took basically 19 and a half minutes of questioning before they closed the case. What we learned through that investigation was that there was a detective, Detective Roger Golubski, who was on the force for over 30 years, who had been sexually abusing Black women in Kansas City, Kansas with impunity. In addition to that, he sexually abused Lamont's mother, Rosie. When she was stopped by him, he told her she had to come to the station with him. She went there. He forced her to perform sex acts on him. And when that was happening, another police officer walked in to the room, saw it happen, and closed the door. So as a result of her making a complaint and then moving and changing her number to get away from him, when he was called essentially to cover up this hit that had happened in a drug deal, he created a photo array of 3 of Rosie's family members and one other person who'd made a complaint against him. And he didn't care who he got. He was punishing his enemies. And so through that, we started to uncover what the community has known all along, that this is a police department that has had rampant abuses of power.
Is that officer still employed?
He's retired and draws his pension. So nothing has happened to him. Lamont has a civil case, and in that civil case, they deposed him, and he took the Fifth Amendment over 550 times.
Wow. Wow. Oh, wow. Okay, so now we've talked about the DOJ's pattern or practice investigations on this show into police departments in different cities across the country, and they were usually in response to a high-profile case. For example, the police department in Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was killed by police. Is that perhaps needed here to get the DOJ's attention, or at least act with some urgency?
I mean, certainly we think there already have been high-profile cases, right? Lamont McIntyre being one of them, what happened to him and his mother. We've had other clients who've been exonerated. And the reality is, Detective Golubski was on the force for 30 years. His partner in that time became the chief of police, who was the chief of police until just shortly years ago. And actually just this last week, the current chief of police says, we don't need an independent investigation. I mean, we talk about these sex acts. There are also a number of dead women who were murdered, women who had been sex workers who were murdered, who are connected to Detective Golubski in a number of different ways, having worked as informants for him, having been forced to perform sex acts on him. And none of that has been investigated. Many of their deaths were never investigated at all.
Well, listen, we reached out to Kansas City, Kansas police about this story, and a spokesperson said the Team Rock statement doesn't contain any new information, and there really is nothing to comment on. The DOJ didn't respond as well. So, but they did talk to the Washington Post back in October, and that's when Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta said, quote, whether or not an investigation is opened, we take all of the requests and information provided seriously. She went on to say the agency is getting a lot more requests for investigation. First, your response to the police department's comment about there's nothing here, there's no telltale, there's nothing here to talk about.
Well, I mean, if they're saying that there's nothing new, certainly maybe there's nothing new because it's the corruption and problems that have been occurring for decades, right? But that has to be examined, and people have to be held to account. As we mentioned, Detective Golubski is just one individual on this force. You cannot get away with all of the things that were being done by him without the sort of participation of the other folks in your office. In regards to whether the DOJ will respond or what those things are supposed to be doing, this is a department that has been investigated by the FBI multiple times. in recent open records requests, FOIA requests that were filed by local journalists here in Kansas City, they uncovered, that there were all of these complaints that have been happening. And in FBI reports, they said essentially we can't get any more information because of the walls of blue that have come together and won't provide any more information. We know it's there. The community knows it's there. The community has been saying for decades that this is happening, that it's still happening. And it's horrible on it, quite frankly, that it took a group of lawyers for anyone to listen to them. People should have been listening all along. And so now when there's an even louder voice, I just hope that somebody answers it.
Well, what do you say to the Vanita Gupta, who says that these issues are important to the department, whether they investigate them or not, but there's a lack of response? I mean, I know that you all have been asking the DOJ to investigate Kansas City police since 2017, and you have yet to hear from them. So how important can these issues really be to the department? Are they understaffed? Should they have more people respond? At least giving a response shows that they're paying attention and they actually care enough to give a response.
Yeah, I mean, I work at a nonprofit, so I can appreciate folks not having enough resources to provide the services that they want to. But it's a false argument to say that there's a limited pie. They can get more resources. We need more resources. We shouldn't have to be competing with other jurisdictions, which is to say, well, which corruption is the worst? I mean, they're all terrible and they all need to be investigated. And that's the obligation that we have to every citizen here. So, I can certainly understand that there's a lack of resources, but if anything, then I would hope that the Department of Justice would be beating the drum to say, we need more resources. Look how much, it's needed. It's everywhere. It's here in Kansas City. How could we not respond to Kansas City? Give us more money.
Well, earlier today on BNC Live, our Laverne McGee talked to Alex Spiro, an attorney for Team Rock, and he talked about why the organization decided to get involved in this city specifically. Take a listen.
You start to see patterns or things that are alarming, and if you think that it's an outlier case and you're in a unique position to change something and the change will impact and affect a lot of people, that's really where resources and time should be devoted. And so this is a department that perhaps because it's in the middle of the country and not on the coasts where there's more organizations and more media attention, for whatever reason, it has left a lot of harm in its wake and been unchecked for a long time. And we saw it as an issue we couldn't just stand idly by.
Tricia, tell me about how Team Rock got involved in this case with you all, and what, pulling collective power from an organization or a Team Rock, a Jay-Z, someone who has a platform that can really make a difference, someone who has influence, what that means to cases like these.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, we were just fortunate enough to have a connection that was able to get us in front of a number of individuals at Team Rock who are working on these social justice issues to present about what's happening. We gave a short presentation. We explained, what we know to be true, and they responded essentially immediately. The idea that this could be happening in the United States today, that there are people still suffering, that no one's been held accountable. I mean, the Team Rock took it and ran with it. And what I think is so important about it is this is the first time that anyone with resources has come up and challenged this governmental entity, right? I mean, the reason this has been allowed to continue is because there is no one with power in this place and no one with the resources that can make that happen. And so this is it.
Well, it's always a beautiful thing to see influential people really using their platform and their influence and their power for good. Tricia Rojo Bushnell, Executive Director of the Midwest Innocence Project, always a pleasure having you on, and thank you so much for your work.